Hello, I'm Canay Atalay. Welcome to Regenerative Innovation with Canay. In this program, we are exploring how to innovate, not only to solve problems, but also to innovate our minds and thinking models that are creating the problems. In regenerative innovation, our focus is becoming the humanity who can create products and services and processes or technologies, not just to meet the market demands and to improve in the economies, but also create well-being and contribute to the society and to the environment. In regenerative innovation, our focus is to serve, to enhance, to strengthen the relationships and improve the well-being of all living beings by evolving our innate capacities. Let's explore the dimensions of regenerative innovation, a timeless and at the same time very timely invitation to reclaim our humanity, to take better care of ourselves, of each other, and our beautiful world. In each session, I invite people, inspiring experts and leaders who are not just talking or creating hypotheses around regenerative innovation, but they are actually doing it day in and day out. Today, I'm very happy and excited to have Adip Dada, who is a dear friend of mine, a dear collaborator with us. And let me introduce you about Adip Dada. He is an award-winning environmental activist and architect, founder of the Other Dada Regenerative Consulting and Architecture Practice. Firmly committed to the UN Decade of Action, Adip is engaged in rewilding the city and reclaiming public space by planting native Miyawaki forests in urban landfills through his new initiative, The Other Forest, a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration. Adip trained in the Miyawaki method of afforestation under Shubhendu Sharma and Afforest as their partner of afforestation projects in the Middle East. Since 2019, he has planted over 11 forests across Lebanon, reclaiming more than 3,700 square meters of degraded land by planting them with over 10,500 trees and shrubs of 28 different native species. Adip's story has been produced into Growing Back Beirut, a short documentary about his environmental advocacy and forest-making work. Adip is a regular lecturer on environmental topics with institutions such as Cambridge University, Goethe Institute, the Slow Factory, World Expo Dubai, and South by Southwest ECHO. Welcome, Adip.
Hi, Janai. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's great to see you. You are connecting from Lebanon, I guess.
Exactly. I'm at home in Beirut.
So let's start with the basics, Adip, because many of our audiences might be new to regenerative architecture. Can you please explain what regeneration and regenerative innovation mean, and how are you practicing it in your architectural work?
Sure. So for me, it's really about going beyond the sort of conventional talk about sustainability. And sustainability a lot of times is about actually sustaining the status quo. But as we know, like we can no longer just sustain the status quo. We really need to urgently move beyond that and go into regeneration. So really taking our role back as humans, as active participants in this planet, and sharing this planet with so many other organisms and with the planet itself. So the planet has its own sort of life and needs, and we have been for a long while in more or less harmony and balance with that, but then over the last few centuries have become more extractors and destroyers of the planet. So how do we reclaim our role as stewards of the planet and active participants alongside all of the other organisms on which we depend, and they depend on us as well? So understanding the sort of interdependence that exists between us and all other living organisms and the planet itself. And so through the work that we do, through the architecture work, or the consulting work that we do, it's really about moving away from this idea of sustainability and this idea of scarcity. There aren't enough resources, and so we need to, we need to reduce this, and sustainability is all about like reduction and austerity. And it's actually not true. For me, there is enough resources around, they're just misallocated. And so if we look at this from a place of abundance, what can we actually offer the world? What can we offer through the work that we're doing, through every single project, whether that's a tiny interior design project to a large scale like architecture project, a master plan, or urban projects as well? What can we offer back? How can we bring life back? How can we restore degraded areas? How can we think about the more than human? And so really it's about moving away from human-centered design into life-centered design. When we're designing with life in mind, automatically we're designing for humans, but understanding that humans are a part of something larger.
I love that you are framing the focus on how we can give back, how we can really bring the life back instead of how we can take from, how we can build this on top of. So that level of inclusivity and diversity in the intersection of the disciplines that you are bringing touches on so many domains. I have been having the chance to be with you in our programs, also following you and your beautiful works around the world the last 2 years. And you are like a myth buster to me. You're busting myths that many people believe, such as, we need a lot of resources to start regeneration. You're like, Mythbuster, we can just start it wherever we are, whoever we are, just like that. We need to get permissions from the governments and we need to have all the stakeholders buy in. You're like, Mythbuster, no, we can just go ahead and find alternative, very frugal routes to it. But the most important Mythbuster for me is that building an architecture work is a lot of cement, but actually you are changing that with the materials and the approaches and the sensitivity you are bringing to that domain. Can you please share with us how you are approaching, especially I would like to start with the city design, because right now I'm in Istanbul, it's a mega city, as you know, and in the upcoming years, it's going to be very important as many people are moving to cities, and so many of our health and well-being is affected by the way that we are wrongly designing and building cities. What is your approach to city design, and what are your invitations to people who are making decisions about the future of cities?
I mean, it's going to sound funny, like an architect would say, stop building new buildings, and just start looking at what's there, what is already available. As they like to say, it's like the most sustainable building is the one that doesn't get built. And there's a truth in that, some truth in that. I think cities, like instead of building new cities from scratch and thinking like, oh, I'm going to build the most sustainable city, but I'm going to do it all the way out in the desert. It's like starting all of this from scratch, like that doesn't work, in my opinion. It's just, we have so much already that's there. There's so much that's built. It's like you're saying, oh, my phone, like something's wrong, I'm just going to throw it away and like build a new phone from scratch. It's like, no, you can maybe actually fix it. So instead of, going back and starting something from scratch, all the infrastructure, all the materials, extracting materials and doing all of this, if we put all this effort and money into rethinking our cities from the perspective not only of nature, but of life as a whole. So cities host life, not just of humans, even though they are built for humans and by humans, but we end up having a lot of animals, a lot of insects, a lot of different things that interact and that actually live in the city. We tend to think of the worst ones, like the rats and the roaches and the pigeons. But if we design our cities better, I think we can actually host a lot more interesting and a much more balanced life. And so we can, and that's what we do. So that's when we say, we're moving away from human-centered design, thinking of life-centered design. How can cities host life for the more than human? How can our buildings host life for the more than human? We can see in a lot of derelict buildings, like, they get taken over by nature, they get taken over by plants, by insects, by, different animals. And so how can I actually design in this way? So my first invitation is to really take stock of what's there, what has been abandoned, why has it been abandoned, what structures already exist. So instead of destroying all of the cement, which is going to end up in the landfill or very rarely get recycled to something new, let's really put this effort and creativity into actually seeing how they are being taken over by other humans that don't necessarily fit within the system, but also how they've been taken over by other forms of life, from fungi to plants and insects and other animals. And can we think of how do we give them a second life? How do we give these buildings a second life and these neighborhoods a second life? And that goes from the building itself to the land that's around it, the sidewalks around the roads. Can we de-pave roads? Can we work with nature-based solutions in terms of, instead of making new infrastructure, more infrastructure, can we actually start learning from nature and seeing how nature actually deals with flooding and storms and noise and pollution and all of that, and actually start developing, so essentially what we call nature-based solutions, to make cities a lot more resilient and a lot more pleasant.
And it's such an optimized and efficient solution to really heal the people, because in that balance, in that harmony, we somehow recover from the deprivation of feeling siloed in those cement buildings, and with all the sensorial experiences, even the way that we hear the birds when they are not around, it affects us. So as much as we like to think, the cities are for humans, but actually being together makes cities livable also for humans. And I know that you have done amazing work in COP28, and I have also seen some of your projects where you have brought the indigenous plants and some of the birds that were actually gone back to the area by creating solutions designed specifically for them, with the texture, with the colors. I remember the project drawings that you have shown me. My curiosity is, when you are designing these inclusive, life-centric architectural work, what is your way of research? In my platform, The Heroines, we have non-human personas where we are designing value propositions. And I'm curious, in an architectural work, when there is a neighborhood, when there is an area, when it's the sustainability venue of COP28, where you were invited to do the sustainability area with the other Dada as an architecture firm, how do you make the research? How do you include birds and plants and other species into the design process and considering their needs? Do you use some technology, or is it like observations? How do you do that?
So basically, me, so I studied architecture, then I studied design and technology. I went into a lot of research into natural systems and living systems, and eventually got to work with, learn about biomimicry, and then actually get a degree in biomimicry. And so biomimicry is design that's inspired from nature. And the idea is that life has evolved on this planet for 3.8 billion years, and in a lot harder conditions than the ones that humans are facing. So much harder challenges than the ones humans are facing right now. And life has developed many different organisms that have dealt very successfully and adapted very successfully to these challenges. So instead of reinventing the wheel, and obviously we've seen with our human inventions, a lot of times, what seems like a great human invention ends up having very bad long-term impacts, that then we look at how to reverse that through more human invention and more technologies. And it's always about, bigger and better and more expensive and more technology. So it's really, how do we go back to basics and humble ourselves in a way that we're looking to nature as a mentor? So we're not looking to nature in terms of what can we extract from nature, but what can we actually learn from nature? And so that's already a shift in mindset. And so when we start designing, I'm always like, along with my team, in the premise of biomimicry is that you always need to invite a biologist at the design table to have these different perspectives, these transdisciplinary teams, but include people who are, talk with the natural world, so biologists and healers and farmers and all of that. So you start getting a very different perspective and more of the perspective of nature as well. We also look at looking at the bioregion. So where are we building? We're not importing designs, sustainable designs, or incredible regenerative designs from halfway around the world and then just putting them here. It's like we need to be of place. We need to understand what are the local conditions, what are the local ecosystems that we're building in. So that's also essential. So we start looking at the local ecosystem. We look at what are the challenges of this ecosystem, what are the opportunities for us to learn, and that's the start of our project. So biomimicry is kind of inherent in our way of looking at projects and the way of working. And then when we think of the end user, we don't think of humans only. We look at the protagonists, who's participating in the story, and the story of the building as it unfolds, or of this urban design project, or whatever project that we're working on. And so the protagonists also include the wind, the air, the sun that is shaping that building, or that's going to have an impact on that building. The protagonists include the microorganisms in the soil, like when we open up the soil and free the soil from cement, concrete, and asphalt. The interaction with the roots, the trees, the insects, the birds. So we're really looking at what was this place before, what was the city before, what was this neighborhood before, what can we practically think of bringing back? Obviously, we're not bringing back the big mammals into the city, but we definitely can bring back microorganisms. We definitely can bring back insects. We can bring back some reptiles. We can bring back birds. So it's thinking of what was there before. Now that the city is here, how can we work together to be better hosts for these other forms of life? Understanding that we're not going to go with the things that don't work, but what are things that actually can practically work? And that's the way that we approach our projects.
And that's beautiful. With all these capacities and curiosities, and as I know you, the unstoppable force that you are for peace and harmony and regeneration, Adib, I'm curious, when I look around the city and the world, I see so many opportunities with regenerative innovation. And where do you put your focus these days? What are the areas that you are focusing with your company as yourself to really create that regenerative transformation meaningfully? In what domains, in what areas, with what type of people? And more than human life.
So through the Other Dada organically grew over the past 12 years into what it's become right now. So now we're essentially working with building habitat for humans. So mostly buildings that humans occupy, but thinking of these other life forms that could occupy some parts of these buildings with us. And then from there, we've also moved into looking at building other habitat, which is the forest that you've mentioned. So really looking at how do we reclaim these degraded areas in the city. They could be tiny, they could be like 1 square meter, they could be 100 square meter, they could be 10,000 square meters. How do we reclaim these degraded areas, these leftover pieces of land, the little roundabout, this kind of forgotten street corner, bringing the community and actually giving the community the agency to know that they can actually be doing something positive with regards to the climate crisis. Because a lot of times you talk to people and they're like, it's out of my hands, it's too big, it's like, I recycle, I do this and that, but that's it. And so it's actually, there are really simple ways that you can bring this life back and that you can actively participate. So this sense of agency was taken away. The sense of agency was taken away from us by the system in place, because it's easier for, I don't know, the systems, the corporations, all of that to sell you solutions instead of saying like, you could actually do this yourself. So we don't need, I mean, obviously we need these big climate mitigation projects and all of that, but there's also a lot of things that we can do at the individual level. And it starts obviously with self, it starts with this teeny tiniest community, and then it grows bigger. I started within my own neighborhood and, you know, to other neighborhoods, and now we work at the city level and across different cities in Lebanon, as well as in the region. So yeah, so that's the kind of work that we're doing with the forest. So we really go into these degraded areas, clean up the site, dig up the site, clear all the trash, bring life back to the soil. So soil is essential to life. That's one of the most important things and one of the most overlooked. Freeing soil up from the concrete, from the asphalt that covers it, which then allows for rainwater to infiltrate. It prevents flooding. It reduces the temperature in the city. Once we have healthy soil, we can really then have a healthy forest. And then we have a healthy forest, we can have healthier air, we can have less temperature, we can have more life for humans and other organisms as well. So that's, you know, all of this kind of like happens at the city level. And then, you know, when we look at, we look also at kind of building like different, we're also looking at building healing spaces, you know, like healing habitat. So, for example, in response to the horrific blast, the Beirut blast in August 2020, it was really about how can we, for example, go back into schools that were destroyed and work with the students at creating new spaces for them within their playgrounds. And these schools, you know, they're like concrete, and the playground is concrete. So the kids have always been so disconnected from nature. It's like, how do you open up a, you know, a really small space, 10 meters, 20 meters, 100 square meters within the school, that the students can see this concrete getting out, and then they can see, you know, they're participating in making the soil healthy again, and they're participating in planting, and then in maintaining those forests, and then seeing the forest thrive, and understanding that when we're planting a native forest, when we're learning from nature, observing and emulating nature, we don't need to maintain this forest forever. 2 years, 3 years time, and this forest becomes self-sufficient. So you don't need to do anything. You get to just sit and enjoy. So it's, you know, we don't need this constant, but this doesn't make business sense, because they're like, who's selling you the fertilizer? How do we make money off of this? Who's, you know, no one's doing the maintenance anymore, you know? So it hits against the current market, the current trends, the current system. So for me, it's really about kind of minimizing all of this, minimizing the technology, minimizing all of this, so that at the base is a project that is bringing a community together, a community that is about the human and the more than human, bringing them together, understanding the interdependence, working together on healing these degraded habitats, and as much as possible, not using any technology in an essential way, because technology can fail. Or in Lebanon, we don't even have the energy to run that technology anyway. So the project needs to stand on its own without any of that. But then technology comes in as a beautiful add-on that can augment the project. But what I want to make sure is that the project on its own stands and can become self-sufficient. And then whatever technology we add to it is about collecting data, learning, improving, augmenting the experience that you can have, and, you know, maybe achieving even greater impact. So that's also how we sort of, I veered into the tech that was coming up.
And like you said, then while we are doing all these things, we can also learn from nature humbly how to innovate technologies in a way that are regenerative as well, and self-sustainable, and in harmony with nature and our innate capacity to feel well and peaceful. So and many opportunities.
That brings us to the, I mean, like, that's why we, you know, so then, you know, so we're building Habitat for Humans, we're building this other habitat here, working on building learning habitats. So really getting into schools. So after the exposure, after these projects we did, we really started focusing on schools, because we felt that connection, that innate connection of kids to nature, you know, like, and so really starting to think, okay, like working with children, like we're working with preschool children, 3 to 6 years old, and then older students as well, but really having this sense of them having that agency, so that they don't need to learn it later on. It's just there, they're just doing it. as they're growing up, as they're growing with this forest that is growing, as they're seeing their spaces getting transformed from concrete to green. So really then starting embedding this into their curriculum. So how do we transform these forests into learning spaces and learning gardens, and what kind of activities can we do there? You know, we talk about STEAM and all of that, but we can learn science, we can learn technology, we can learn about, you know, the arts and math and all of this through these projects that we're doing. So how do we then make different types of curriculum, kind of bringing, you know, this alternative school system, forest schools and Rudolf Steiner, you know, like all of these things, how do we bring them into the mainstream school system? The same way that, you know, most people live in cities, so it's difficult to get people out of the city into nature. How about we bring nature back and reconnect people back with nature in the city? How about we also bring this alternative education system into the mainstream education system? Very little people are putting their kids into alternative education systems. So how do we actually bring that and not reserve this, you know, thing for the people who are, you know, who can either afford to be in those type of schools or have that awareness of those types of schools, but how to bring those lessons into the mainstream system. So that's another thing that we really focus on. And all of that together, I mean, leads us to, for example, the work that for COP28 by which, you know, we were approached to do a temporary pavilion for COP28. And then for us, of course, like a temporary pavilion, like that's the ultimate unsustainable thing to do. So then we negotiated, you know, it's temporary doesn't mean 2 weeks. Temporary means 6 months to 1 year. So then we, you know, we got the approval to keep this pavilion up from 6 months to 1 year. And then we really started, like we designed everything, the design itself, the materials, everything, with this idea of once this pavilion serves a first life on land, where it's regenerating degraded land, where it's restoring life to basically a desert, a concrete landscape in the middle of the city, in the middle of Dubai. How do we transform this concrete landscape into a life-giving landscape, and through a life-giving building that is providing shelter to humans and some food to humans and water, but that's also providing water and shelter and food to other organisms, working with botanists, with ecologists, with desert conservationists, with bird specialists to understand the challenges and what are the opportunities, and combining all of this into an architectural structure, and which after it has served its first life of bringing life back to the concrete landscape, its second life, it gets disassembled and it gets reassembled in the sea. So it is made up of steel, and instead of us recycling that steel structure, the steel was kept totally untreated. It's at the moment still up and it's still rusting, and eventually it will be dismantled and then reassembled in the sea, so that it can become part of a coral reef restoration project. So thinking of that, what's that first life? What is that second life? And then so it's giving a second life underwater. And then the third life of this is like, okay, so many people have asked us, oh, can we do this in Monaco? Can we do this in Jordan? Can we do this here and there? And we're like, it doesn't make sense. We cannot take this there. We're not going to move it there, because that is built of place, like for that very specific site. But then we can, of course, take the principles, the regenerative principles behind that project anywhere else around the world. So if we're doing this in Indonesia, then that is maybe built out of bamboo. And that serves a second life as, I don't know what, a bird sanctuary. And if we're doing this somewhere else, so we really just take the principles of nature and the principles of life and then adapt it to every single context. So that's what we're kind of referring to as interspecies habitat that we are committed to.
Amazing work, Adib. Congratulations from the bottom of my heart. This sounds like one of the most exciting global invitations I have heard lately. And thank you for all your work and for this beautiful conversation. Before we end, I would like to ask you one final question. As I shared with you, we are a curious platform and we like to ask questions to each other. John Hagel left you a question. We have this inquiry circle, and this is his curiosity. What is a really inspiring and exciting narrative and opportunity that could bring all the people together to create an environment for all living beings to thrive? What type of an opportunity and what type of an environment? Sounds like you are already doing it, but let's answer.
I mean, for me, it's really, I mean, we've already discussed that, but it's really changing the narrative that humans are inherently bad, and that the planet would be better off without humans. I don't agree with that statement. Humans are part of the ecosystem. We have had, an influence, or let's say maybe a bad impact in the last few centuries. But I really believe that if we are to reframe humans and not made to feel bad, well, first of all, we're made to feel bad as humans in terms of our impact on the planet, our negative impact on the planet, as if it is the only impact that we can have. And then the second thing is that we are made to feel like we don't have the agency to do anything about it. And we need to rely on government, on corporations, on technology to save us and save the planet. So I totally disagree with the statement. Like, we're not here to save the planet. The planet will survive without us. But we can participate in healing the planet and at the same time in healing ourselves. So it's really about understanding that we do have the agency to make a change, to be actors of good change, and to be, the solution that we're looking for. We don't need to look outside of ourselves.
Adib, beautiful human, beautiful leader, beautiful steward, beautiful father, partner, and friend. Thank you so much for this great conversation, for your amazing services, and inspiring and encouraging us even more to reclaim our humanity and to start with ourselves, with where we are, with whatever we have, because what we have is enough. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Around us.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you, Adib. Looking forward to seeing you soon again. Take good care. A Mythbuster conversation with Adib Dada, starting with human habitats, including other species, including all of us. Because guess what? The planet is already regenerative, and life is inviting us to participate with what we can gift and what we can serve with love, with our human dignity, with our human capacities and intelligence, with our care, with our willingness to create opportunities for more life to grow. What a beautiful, loving invitation, and not just an invitation, but so many case studies, so many examples and processes are happening all around the world. No excuses. It's the time, dear audience. Thank you so much for participating in this journey with me. I really appreciate being together. And obviously, this is just an initiation. So please join us in regeneratex.co with all the experts, guests that you are seeing here, so many community members. We are here to grow, to share, to inspire, but to walk together. I wholeheartedly invite you to join us. I'm Canay Atalay. Thank you for watching us. Let's take better care of ourselves, of each other, and this beautiful planet. Thank you. See you in the next episode.